Hello, is that better? Am I coming through now? I sure hope I'm not muted anymore. Here I am. Okay. Let's start that again. One of the things that I inherited from my predecessors was something called the Parish Musicians Workshop. The idea is that we gather together local musicians to study the music of the church, to study the sacred treasury of the church's music, and practice that a little bit. Um, yeah, and so I got to. This was my first one. I'd never been to one before, and I got to learn a little bit about it. And I really greatly appreciate the work of my predecessors and all of the area musicians who are uh, on the board, basically that help set it up. They do. They frankly do most of the heavy lifting. I just kind of show up and uh, do a few little things. Supervise it, make sure it happens. And I gave a breakout session. So let me show you some of the secrets of the church here. This is Sacrosanctum Concilium. It's one of the documents of the Second Vatican Council. We'll get it a little bigger there for those on a phone. Um, and this is a rather common story, as somebody will be studying the church's documents on music, and they'll get to this. This is Second Vatican Council, 1962. The church acknowledges Gregorian chant as specially suited to the Roman liturgy. Therefore, other things being equal, it should be given pride of place in liturgical services. But other kinds of sacred music, especially polyphony, are by no means excluded from liturgical celebrations, so long as they accord with the spirit of the liturgical action as laid down in Article 30. Now, when I first read this, it was in my first year of seminary, and grew up in pretty average churches, especially with the music. Usually on a Sunday, you got the old four hymn sandwich: entrance hymn, offertory hymn, communion hymn, closing hymn. That's going to be your most common musical arrangement during a Catholic liturgy. I got into seminary, and all of a sudden we were chanting antiphons a whole lot more than I ever had in my life. And I was like, oh, okay, this is different. Most of the mass looked about the same. I really enjoyed it, but here we are doing all this chant. And so I decided I was going to write a. I had to take a research paper writing class, which is a great thing for a freshman to be doing, learning that skill. So I decided I would write it on the church's music. And I got to this point, and it was a bit of a mind blower. And the thought that I had was, why haven't we been doing this? I mean, it's not like um, this is unclear, right? It's specially suited to the Roman liturgy. Therefore, other things being equal, it should be given pride of place in liturgical services. Uh, Now, the answer as to why we're not doing that is much more complicated than I care to get into tonight. Um, but I would like to offer a little bit of commentary as to why Gregorian chant is, at least my thoughts, why Gregorian chant is specially suited to the Roman liturgy. This is basically a summary of the breakout talk that I got, which I intend to put up here on this channel here soon. So if you really enjoy it, you can go get the full thing. There are three basic modes of music. Any piece of music will fall into one or more of these three modes of music. Uh, the modes are the Apollonian, the Romantic, or the Dionysian. Apollonian music, Romantic music, or Dionysian music. Now, it's important to remember that it can hit two, maybe it can hit all three. I don't know. I'm not quite sure that's possible. And what makes these three different modes of music different was what faculties of the human person that they affect most directly. These three different modes of music affect the different faculties of the human person differently depending on what sort of music it is. And so the Apollonian speaks primarily to the intellect. It goes kind of into your head. It shows you the patterns, and it's music that tends to speak to the intellect more. The example I gave two examples. One of them was sacred music, and the other one was secular music. So the example of sacred music I had was the Kyrie from the Missa Papa Marcelli by Palestrina. Uh, and the example of secular music I gave, just about a minute of Desolation Row by Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan's music really is designed to speak to the intellect primarily, and so that's why I thought that would be a good example of Apollonian music. For romantic music, I took the Miserere Mei by Allegri, and if you don't know that one, it's the one where the soprano goes. Oh, it's not coming through my microphone. Hold on one second. Way up there. And the example of romantic music I gave was I Will Always Love You by Whitney Houston. Things that play on your passions, things that play on your emotions. That's an example of romantic music. It goes straight to the heart, you could say. And the example for Dionysian music was Sandstorm, everybody's favorite middle school dance song. Kind of that insistent techno beat there gets your body moving without you really having to think about it. We got those three different major modes of music: the Apollonian, which goes to the intellect first; the romantic, which goes to the passions, the emotions first; and the Dionysian, which goes to the body first. Now, what I argue is that Sacrosanctum Concilium, the Gregorian chant, hits the Apollonian mode of music perfectly. That it is very focused on the text. It's very focused on this orderly, rising and falling of the melodies. Uh, it can be kind of predictable sometimes, and I actually think that that makes it very well suited for the Roman liturgy, because liturgy comes down to us out of heaven. It comes to us from God, and in the same way, when the music begins by working on our intellect primarily, it has a down flowing effect, right? It starts with the intellect. Oftentimes, the truth that your intellect connects to causes a movement of the passions, and then that settles your body down. It brings everything kind of aligned. Heaven and earth connects those well. Uh, Whereas I think, especially with the Dionysian, that gets your body moving immediately. That's more of an eruption of movement, of excitement, of energy. But who knows what it's going to produce in the rest of you? And the romantic mode of music, playing with the passions, uh, if that's not closely joined with the appropriate thing in the Apollonian, it can create all sorts of movements in your mind, in your intellect there. And so, because the Gregorian chant uh, specifically moves the mind first, and then through the mind moves the rest of the human person, um, I think that is part of the reason why the church holds that up as the music most suitable to the liturgy. Now, it's not like these other forms of music are bad, that you shouldn't dance to something with a good beat, that you shouldn't listen to things that uh, make uh, make you uh, speak to your passions. But liturgy is a little different. Liturgy is something set aside. It's sacred. It's special, and it should not necessarily be of this world. So, with that, let's take a look at some of these comments here. Yeah, started off the stream muted. What an absolutely brilliant way to start off. Uh, Corey Cobell is already a Vatican II fan, just like me. Uh, Yeah, Darude Sandstorm, exactly that. Yeah, and yeah, Trey, that's a big old question. Basically, by making it simpler and a little flatter, um, you know, greatly expanded the use of vernacular in the liturgy, took out a lot of the symbolism, and made it rather talkier. There's a lot more talking going on, a lot less whispering prayers in Latin. It's really hard to talk about it without going into either a whole lot of detail that would be irritating to talk about, or actually just going into a church. So there you have it. And Chad says, I love music that weaves all three seemingly seamless. If you can come up with an example of one that hits all three, I feel like it's hard to get all three together. I'm not going to say that it's impossible, but I am thinking that it is going to be very difficult. Uh, how could I know which liturgy a Catholic Church is going to use ahead of time? Basically, 98% of Catholic churches are going to use the Roman liturgy because they're Roman Catholic churches. So as long as it doesn't say like Byzantine or Chaldean Catholic, it'll be a Roman liturgy. If you want to know more specifics, you should just take a visit. I don't know. Right relation to the highest is important. Thanks. Who's that guy? I have no idea. Yes, let's go deep on the issues of implementation in Vatican II. Well, I don't want to just talk that one into a microphone. Or the hymn "How Great Thou Art" fit in the music categories. I think that's a good combination of the Apollonian and the Romantic, uh, and it brings the two together well. And I don't think the Romantic is bad or unsuited to the liturgy per se, but you don't just want to go and stir up people's emotions without being able to target that at something. So you can think of something rather simple like "Were you there when they crucified my Lord?" That can really, especially in a Good Friday service during the veneration of the cross, you can uh, you can really, it's very simple, kind of moves the passions a little bit, but you have a target for all of that emotion, and so it doesn't tend to cause as much trouble. Multi-hour video on issues with Vatican II. Well, I would like to have some counterbalance there, so it's not all just my ideas. Stairway to Heaven kind of pulls it off. Yeah, but what exactly is he singing about? What exactly is he singing about? I'm not entirely sure there. Well, just because it's so complicated, and like it's the sort of thing where people get one idea and go kind of crazy on it. And so getting other people's perspectives to broaden the categories here, that's I think would be very helpful. And just so, yeah, people are still arguing about it, and I wouldn't want to give the impression of there being unity that does not yet exist. That's what I'm thinking. Sure, in the church, though, go after the highest. The rest is for the rest of life. Just remember that all of this is on the record, and got to be careful with it. How would the Russian chant style, like they use in some Eastern Divine liturgies, compare with Gregorian chant using those categories? That's the most moving to me. I'm not terribly familiar with kind of the more Russian chant styles. I think it would still fall into that Apollonian category because of just kind of the state of mind it gets you. It's rather simple still, and it's designed to draw your mind towards the text and to contemplate about it, rather than specifically some dramatic romantic line to lift your heart up. And I don't know if you would really rave out to it. So yeah, well, that's what I got. Is it what they sing about or what you make of it? I don't know what they're singing about. That's the problem. It's certainly some evocative, poetic imagery. And speaking of things that are evocative and poetic, there's Ted. Um, yeah, I don't know. Stairway to Heaven. Have you been listening to this, Ted?
Yeah, I just caught that you guys were talking about liturgical music.
Sure, sure. So I gave three categories, three modes of music that people can, you could judge all music by. You've got the Apollonian, which speaks to the intellect first, the Romantic, which speaks to the passions first, and the Dionysian, which speaks to the body first.
Ooh,
And the context was Gregorian chant is very Apollonian, and it comes down into your intellect and then washes into the rest of your person. Therefore, it mirrors the image of liturgy, the highest coming down and touching the earth. Um, so,
I love that. Yeah, yeah, that's which is interesting because I think people tend to hear that and they think, well, then it's not so much as how does it enter your person, but where does it live? And I think that people who think that haven't spent enough time with music, you know. And so, oh, dang it, am I frozen? Are you frozen?
you're doing just fine, Ted. You froze for
Oh,
a while,
okay,
but your voice was
okay.
coming through.
Well, so I was gonna say, and that notion that it's where things like just enter into your being rather than where they live can cause all kinds of trouble. Like for instance, you might look at Gregorian chant and think that it's like,
Oh no.
Uh-oh. Now he's frozen. Now he's
No,
gone. He
he's gone
vanished.
entirely. Yeah.
Oh no. Yikes. I was hoping you would speak to the poetic nature of music, right? Which to me is like that's where the rubber really meets the road is how poetic is it, right? How many things is it drawing in? Because music has that resonance, right? But also that rhythm, right?
Mhm.
And then that harmony. Like these are all the different, and there's more. I'm not a music expert, right? There's all these different components that you're latching onto, right? And it's much like the difference between, say, a church without icons and a church with icons, a church without tradition and a church with tradition. Like these differences matter. And it's sort of like a lot of music for me, especially something like Stairway to Heaven. Look, Stairway to Heaven's a great song. They wrote it in 20 minutes though. Just saying, right? And it's a fantastic, it's not the best song on that album, but it is the second best song on that album. It's a fantastic song, but it's totally incomplete picture. Like it's just an incomplete picture. And an incomplete picture is great because you can insert your own thing into it. But I don't think you want as much inserting my own into it in a liturgical setting as you do outside of a liturgical setting. And I think the same goes for poetry. And so if you look at the poetry of, I'll pick some random poet out of a hat like William Blake, because it's a poet I know best anyway. Right, you can see the difference in his poems, right, in terms of the ones that are pointing towards a religious affect, if you will, and the ones that are more pointing towards the earthly aspect. And I think what you're pointing to with your music exemplification is really all three are necessary. People hate that, right? They just have a problem with three things being necessary. Three necessary aspects to music, right?
Mhm.
And one of them is kind of above the other two, and probably one of them is in the middle and one of them is sort of down below, right? But they're all necessary. So the fact that they're in a hierarchy doesn't matter. Like it's necessary. It matters because hierarchy exists and you can't get around it. But it doesn't matter that it's not a bad thing that it's there, and it's not like let's try and combine it and unify it and all that. Like and also poetry is separate from
Mhm.
music, right?
Mhm.
Even though you often hear poetry within music unless it's strictly instrumental.
Right,
But then
right.
I would argue the poetic aspect of it just changes.
Right, right. Yes. Am I coming through?
Yeah, yeah.
I had some trouble with my cord.
Uh-oh. Yeah, you freaked me out because I thought my machine was broken, and it was like never occurred to me that you were muted, even though it's like We've had this problem
It's
before.
extremely common, actually.
Right. But my first thing was my computer's broken because my computer's been acting up quite a bit lately. Let's see if we can get Ted back. Come
I
on,
sure hope
Ted.
Ted's computer. Ted.
We're so back, baby. Isn't that what the young kids are saying?
I think it's just Zach. Anyway.
No, okay. So I don't know what I missed you guys in there for a little bit. Something went haywire with the internet. But so one of the things that you're saying, Father, that with the intellect, the passions and the appetites, is that music doesn't just live in one place, right? Like it ends up. I mean, this is the thing about music and poetry, is that it works all through you. And so but your intellect has like the greatest facility to discern between what's good and bad for you. And so if your engagement with music is on the basis of the appetitive, which is probably the worst, or the passions, which is a little bit better if your passions are well formed. But those it's not just like when you engage with something like in terms of what your body is attracted to that just stays in your body, right? Because we're these integrated beings. And so what you end up doing is that as you go down to that level, especially if you're not very careful, then you start to let all kinds of stuff into yourself that you maybe don't want to, which is one thing. And then the other thing that I was thinking about when I was digging through what I was trying to get the internet back on is that that you're talking about that liturgical model, but that also is, you would be able to remind me of the term for this, which is, it's essentially what Adam and Eve had before the fall. It's like original integrity. It's like
original integrity, original justice, the preternatural gifts, if you want to be real fancy.
Yes. Yeah. So that's right. So that's where the intellect regulates the body through the emotions, essentially.
Right.
And
So the idea between integrity is that the soul had perfect command of the body.
Yes.
And so whatever the mind would recognize as being true, the body would just immediately be obedient to it. So you might say, right now, for my sustenance, a kale salad would be the most logical and rational and really good thing for me to eat. And then you would eat the kale, and your passions would be like, yes, kale. This is perfectly rational, and like the full sense of the word rational, that you're properly integrated into the universe, and then it would taste good.
How is that not me? I don't understand. I live in the
never
age of
seen
gnosis.
you eat a vegetable, Mark.
I know. It's so true.
You've also talked about you and M&Ms. It's peanut M&Ms, right? Where you're like, keep it out of the house.
Jordan almonds, peanut butter cups. I just had some peanut butter cups. My peanut butter cups have been upgraded since I'm not doing the shopping right now, so they're now dark chocolate and all natural peanut butter. But yeah, not getting right. But that's the age of gnosis, where we think we're rational creatures. And it's like, have you looked at your behavior lately? You're not a rash. You can't do that. You can't just go like, oh, I should eat kale and go to the gym.
Okay. Oh yeah, no. We're definitely not like that.
Yeah,
we've got disorderly passions that get in the way of that, and you know what? Sometimes we just want to do what's wrong.
Yeah, that's the weird one. That's the one that you really have to come to terms with, and a lot of people spend a lot of time excusing that. But I mean, it's pretty easy for me to look at myself and like find times where I'm like, no, I just did that because I knew it was wrong and I wanted to do the thing that was wrong. Like there wasn't some like, oh, it's just mistaken. No. So this is okay. Corey's point here. Why is it the intellect? Is it not equally the beautiful and the good is the true? When I'm talking about the intellect, and I'm pulling more from like St. Thomas's notion of the intellect. This isn't the reason. Part of the reason that we get so hung up on this notion of the intellect is that we think of it in terms of the sort of like computational, like logic gate kind of thinking. And at least what the Western Church presented as the intellect for a long time was so much fuller than that. The intellect is the means by which you apprehend the forms of things, right? Like the word informed in English comes exactly from this tradition where it's like, it is how you were united to things. it's how you came into relationship with things without destroying them, because you can come into relationship with like food by eating it and then it's destroyed, but the intellect is the thing that gives you the capacity to unite yourself to something in a non-destructive manner, which as especially Western Christians spent a lot of time thinking about union, they saw that there are these different kinds of ways of being united to things, in which it becomes less and less about me eating you and more about us like becoming something together. You in other, like it's the process of in othering.
Well, Ted, I would add a little bit to that. I would say it's how we order things and then order ourselves in relation to those things. And this I think is actually important. There's a reciprocal relationship and adjustment there that happens. And that, of course, is in the knowledge engine model on my channel, Navigating Patterns, just saying. And that's actually important, right? Because the way you order things can be suboptimal. And then you can refine that. And the thing that does that is the intellect. So the intellect is not only about relationship, but it's about ordering and relationship, right? Ordering the thing you see, then ordering yourself, creating the relationship, and going through that over and refining that process. And that's where we get confused, because we want like an answer, and you're not going to get an answer, right? So you need the process, right? But the intellect, to your point, that's how it was viewed. The intellect is the thing that does the informing, right? The forming of the signals that come into your brain. And that's what's really important. And that's all in my model, by the way, just saying. It's in that video. It's all there.
Corey, we got you on.
Yeah.
Did you feel like Judy wasn't being spoken up for enough?
No. I just feel like if I typing is slower, I'm mostly going to be listening, because I don't know much about the technical terminology and framing of these things. Even though I love music, I'm not super familiar with the.
No one does.
With Aquinas.
Yeah, but no one knows these things because we stopped teaching these basic things. Some of them were assumed, and we really, like, a lot of my work is around, I keep trying to explain this to people. We have a limited cognitive load, and I don't know what it is, and I don't know if it's greater for me or lesser for Ted, or probably not the other way around. Right? I don't know, but I know it's limited, and I think it's important where you put it. And I think one of the big problems we've had is we've put people's cognitive load towards things like memorization, right? And which is, so the things we memorize, but also the process of memorization. Well, what if part of cognitive load is you can either be good, let's say you could be 80% good at memorization, but then you only have 20% good at critical thinking, or what we would call critical thinking, which I have critiques of, right? And what if in the old days it was the other way around? And I don't know I'm not pretending I understand the answer to any of these things. I'm just saying, if that's true, and it's almost certainly true experimentally, by the way, just saying, then what does that mean about what we're paying attention to?
Well, I think in more ancient and medieval pedagogical techniques, and even up until very recently, memorization was something that was considered to be like, children really need to do this. It is extremely important for children to memorize their multiplication tables, to memorize poetry, to memorize the ending of Latin verbs, to memorize all of the Greek articles.
The Bible.
See, and there's reason
everybody
for this.
Memorized.
So, but this is the important thing, right? Like there's different reasons to memorize things. And the reason that I'm really interested in this is because I am an instructor. But most of my instruction is in how to teach people how to do things, like with their body, like hand-eye coordination type stuff. So I'm always on the edge of, or even going back and forth between, first you learn it in a rote memorize, like from a book style, and you memorize lists and you practice even saying checklists out loud. And then you go over to the thing where you're going to do it. And it's like bridging a gap from one type of learning. Like you have to establish the framework consciously first, and then you actually have to do it, which is a completely different style of learning. But they're both necessary, and they're both mutually supporting. And I'm not convinced that we have a solid understanding, certainly in modern pedagogical methods, of how that works, at least, in most of the instruction that I've received in most of my schooling. And so what I'm saying, the thing that I don't understand is, yet what I'd need to learn more about is the categories and the specific technical terminology that's used from, the scholastic and the medieval philosophical, because I want to bridge all these gaps, because I think we've got pretty much most of what we need to fill these gaps and to come to a better understanding of how these things work, especially once we start integrating the Eastern theology ways of understanding this stuff, because this is what gets me excited. I'm mostly listening because I don't know the technical terms, but I have I've done this stuff a lot, and I think it's really, really, really important, especially because it's not just, schools and teaching kids how to do certain things, or even instruction and whatever. This is like teaching how to learn the Christian life. This is teaching how to be a human being. Like this is at the root, the core of the stuff.
Or anything, right? But part of that is you need rote memorization as a baseline. There's no if anybody argued against that, I'd be like, you're not.
It depends on what you're trying to do, right? Like a child doesn't need rote memorization to learn how to be a daddy. Like Jordan Peterson gives the example of a child who's really good at just acting and imitating. We have these mirror neurons.
But you fundamentally need it, Corey. Like that's what liturgy is. It's right. That's what sets the baseline for these other things to kind of live within. But then the question is, how much do you rely on it? And then the problem with that is some people need to rely on it a lot, and some people can't.
Well, and part of that has to do with uptake. The thing is less. I think it's less about like having done the action of rote memorization, but it's like having material for the intellect. I mean, I'm thinking about this in terms of something very analogous to like hylomorphic being, where you've got matter and form. And if you don't have one or the other, then you don't have being, right? Just matter doesn't have being, and just form doesn't have being. You have to have a substantial form, and memorization is what gives you the material for thinking. And then you also have to learn the patterns of thinking, which the trivium. I mean, that's exactly what it was about. It was about you memorize things so you know stuff, and then you learn how to work with it, and then you learn how to express it. And so going back again, the notion of genius is the shift from knowing what everyone else had said before you to coming up with original things. It's like when you read someone like St. Thomas Aquinas, who's a genius under the old definition, I don't sit there and think, wow, he was like such a dullard who just like copied everything. Like obviously not. He's just like, there's just like all this brilliant insight, and then you go and you talk to someone
together into a big coherent full, and he knew where things went. He knew what was more important and what was less important, and he knew what didn't fit.
And so,
what more do you want?
So then on the other side, I think one of the things that we've done this weird thing where we've taken the arts, particularly as this notion is that it's all just like you express the pattern that's in your head, and people don't have any material to it. And so most of what they generate is trash. And I compare that to like, you read Moby Dick, right? Which is a story about whalers, but like the thing is so full of like literary and biblical references and just like bizarre, like historical and scientific and that like natural history knowledge that I'm blanking on his name, the author's name.
Herman Melville.
Herman Melville. My wife is yelling at me. Herman Melville had, it's like, that's part of what makes it so amazing. The fact that he's weaving these crazy biblical allusions into it, it's like not only does it not detract from it or make it like less original or something like that, it's like that's where you're like, it goes from like a story about a crazy guy chasing a whale to having like the bottom drop out of it, and you just like feel the depths of human existence in the cosmos. It's exactly the fact that he like memorized portions of the Bible. So
right,
I think that there's like you have to have both. But Mark, your point about like what you give your attention to, that there's certain cognitive load that you have, and I mean that is going all the way back to music, right? That there's if you're drawn to music for the wrong reasons, then you end up wasting your attention on things that shouldn't get it, right? And so Gregorian chant, let's say, one of the things that it does is it brings all of that whole because one of the things that's so powerful about music and poetry is that it does really integrate with your whole person. But if you're basing it on what is my body drawn to, or even what are my my emotions drawn to, you might be ordering your time in it to take your like time, attention, and what's the other one?
Energy.
Time, energy, and attention, and directing it and patterning yourself after something you really shouldn't be. Let's say you can see this in the case of something like rap, where it's something like obviously pathological and destructive. But like,
Right.
it doesn't matter that I understand that intellectually when the guy pulls up next to me and his bass is totally pumping at the stoplight, and it's like, it just like, it starts to get you. So then but then if you just like fill your life with that, it's like, what am I being ordered towards by listening to dirty rap all the time? It's like, not good stuff.
I'm talking about the liturgy, right? Like, there's a time and a place to listen to the sappy love songs, and there's a time and a place to just kind of boogie, but liturgy ain't that.
Right. Well, and it's let's suppose something crazy happened, like this priest came to your house and like wanted to play Yes for you because it was really important to him that you hear some early Yes, which you hadn't heard in quite a while, right? That's like an important connection to make with your host in this case, and like it's not liturgical, obviously, right? But it was important at the level that we were at, sort of, not meeting for the first time, right? But spending really, quite a bit of time together for the first time, like a whole week, really, at least 6.5 days, pretty much.
It sounds very interesting. Tell me more about it.
Yeah, I was going to say, this sounds oddly specific.
It does, doesn't it? It was a wonderful.
Let's say that it was close to the edge, 1975, first track on the same titled album.
Right. Well, and hearing that, like I like music, but I'm not musically inclined. I can't play an instrument. I've tried many times. Tiny hands, tiny girl hands. Tried many times to play guitar and piano and those things. And I don't study music, right? I have a sort of rudimentary understanding of these things, but it's kind of important to like meet that way. Like, what kind of music do you like? That's actually important. But like, no one's going to answer, well, my primary music is Gregorian chant. Like, that's the kind of music you listen to when you're on your way to church. Like or when you're in church, right?
Or you're a Benedictine monk.
Or you're a monk, right? But it sets the tone. Well, it's not nobody, right? This is where people get tripped up. It's not what nobody would say. It's not really nobody, right? Because there's always outliers, and there's always monks, and there's always people who listen to nothing but, right? That's always the case. A lot of people listen to nothing but EDM. Fair enough. I like a little EDM every once in a while, right? But is that healthy? Do you need like a balance? Do you need some classical in there? Do you need
anything you can say about 90% of people is still really useful.
Right.
Yes.
90% of people are not going to be listening primarily to Gregorian chant.
Right. Well, and the thing is, though, Ted, I wanted to share it because you gave me a huge insight when you're talking about Moby Dick, which is one I like to use when I talk about postmodernism. It could be that a lot of the idea of postmodernism, the hold of postmodernism, only works with people who don't have a familiarity with the Bible, or who have a familiarity but not a poetic understanding of the Bible. And so they're not understanding those references that you talked about, which means, of course, Moby Dick is not about the feminist struggle to break free from the patriarchy, right? Because of course it's not, because it's grounded in this other thing that you hopefully have some rote memorization of, although I didn't. A little angry about that now. So you would never fall into the trap of arbitrary assignment, which is effectively what postmodernism does. It allows you to make an arbitrary assignment of things.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to bring up, Corey, right? So we're talking about this, let's say one of the diagrams that you could use for this is like, let's say sacred and profane. Profane not in the negative sense, just,
Worldly.
Some things are more sacred and some things are more profane. And so then we went on a pilgrimage, and you got all these young guys from Catholic high schools on the first night of the pilgrimage, and what do they get around and do? I'm asking you, Corey. You're allowed to say.
Oh, you're asking. It's not rhetorical. Just keep going.
No. I'm literally asking you to tell people, because
they broke out the guitar and they were singing in a circle, like mostly Irish folk music, which was awesome.
And rebellion songs, Irish rebellion songs. Like Sticking It to the Black and Tans.
So the happy songs.
The happy songs.
Yeah, because all of their love songs are sad and all of their war songs are happy.
Yes, and now you understand Ireland.
That was the disturbing thing about the ARC conference that I heard from their Vanderklay. So I listened to his ARC Day 3, which is a ridiculous video. It's just ridiculous. Everything wrong with Protestants right there in one video. Don't understand the divine feminine. Yeah, I put an excoriating comment on that one. But the one thing he said, well, they played a couple different songs during the conference, and one of them was from Hamilton, which is, you can kind of justify that. But at the end, they played something from Les Miserables, which
hear the
but it was one about the French Revolution, and I'm kind of like, well, yeah, what do you expect liberals to come up with? Like, they don't have an anchoring in the highest. So the music that's going to emerge, especially if they're not curating it correctly, which I guarantee you they were not, is going to be revolutionary. Because what option is there? Like, either you're pointing up or you're a revolutionary.
I don't know. They could have written a song about Don Juan of Austria.
Don Juan of Austria is going off to war.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I want to write that song now.
The Holy Alliance. Speaking of it's called the Holy Alliance, isn't it? I think it is. Yeah.
The Holy League or Holy Alliance.
The Holy League. It's the Holy League. Thank you. Yes, there were several battle flags of the Holy League at the pilgrimage. Totally awesome flag. The original is I think 7 feet by 14 feet or something enormous, and it's all just this gorgeous, intricately embroidered huge blue flag with a crucifix and all the the various kings who were involved. Totally awesome flag. If you're ever going to go out to war in a battleship, highly recommend it.
No, the new war is all about hiding.
Yes, this is true.
Right.
Yeah. Not getting in a giant line and all seeing who can shoot as quickly as possible the other person. The ship of the lines. Yeah. No, it was interesting. I mean, one of the weird things about the pilgrimage is that you could see the way that you're kind of moving through these different modes all the time. Right. And so sometimes you're just singing hiking songs while you're going, and then other times people are chanting rosaries, and it's I don't know, it all feels very natural, and there's this sort of there's a reason that Catholics, particularly traditional Catholics, tend to have a deep love for folk music, which is really interesting, and traditional folk music in particular. And so I was over at a family's house a couple of weeks ago, and they're just couple of the grown-up siblings broke out the guitar, and they're playing a bunch of old American folk songs that I only knew half of. I mean, they were schooling me, so it was it's interesting the way those things actually do seem to in practice they actually seem to feed into each other very much. And there's this sort of a space, something about having the sacred actually makes a space for the profane. And this actually reminds me of the Hillbilly Thomists, it's a bunch of Dominican friars who are a bluegrass band, because that actually exists, and it's fantastic. But they did an interesting podcast with Dr. Jennifer Frey on her podcast, Sacred and Profane Love, and they're talking about that interaction between the fact that they're friars, and so they chant the hours together in their study house, but then they go out and they're singing all these bluegrass ballads and stuff. It's cool. It's a cool thing.
So I'm curious to bring it back to the modes then. How would you respond to, if we're talking about the Apollonian mode as being maybe the highest or the most appropriate for liturgy, why then, obviously, setting aside the Vatican II discussion and the arguments but why is there value in the beauty of the Latin Mass, where you can't understand anything that's being spoken or sung, assuming you don't speak Latin and have not learned the Mass yet you would find it a very edifying experience, would you not?
Well, the answer is obviously just to learn Latin.
No, not at all. No, I thoroughly disagree. You can understand it. That's the problem. I mean, this is where people get mixed up. They think propositional knowledge is required for understanding. But the way Ted knows how to be a dad has nothing to do with propositions at all. Well, right? He has an understanding of how to parent his children. It's nothing to do with reading a book about how to parent children. And so you get an understanding of these things without the language.
Although I think that's a mismap. I don't think we should equate the propositional to. Sorry,
I've got a better answer for you that I think. Or sorry, Mark, but yeah, I do think this is a better answer. So I'm going to give it to Corey. Sure. So when we started going to Latin Mass, I was working at a butcher shop. I was working on the cutting floor of a small butcher shop, and the music that the guys, I mean, the cutting floor is just all guys. There's, it's I can't imagine why there's no women back there flinging sharp knives around and hauling, 150-pound chunks of beef around in a room. Just can't imagine why it's all guys back there. Who knows? Anyway, but the music that they played there was just, absolutely the most gutter trash music possible. Actually, at one point it got so bad that I would just start singing hymns. And one of the two bosses in there, he's like, "You guys see what you've done? Ted's trying to sing the demons out of the room now. They're all the kind of sort of grew up in church, but none of them did, but their grandparents did." He's like, "You guys let something in the room with this music, and now Ted's trying to sing the demons out with hymns, aren't you?" I was like, "Yeah, that's actually exactly what I'm trying to do here." But then so I'd have 5 days of that, and then we'd go to High Mass on Sunday. And you want to talk about a strange experience? It was that one, and we'd only been going to Mass for a month or two at that point, and so I didn't know all of these Latin hymns and the antiphons. I didn't really understand what was going on with the propers, and I couldn't find them in the missal or any of that. But Corey, when I tell you that when you hear a men's schola singing the propers, and I have no idea what they're saying, it's still so obviously ordering me towards God in charity to be there hearing that. And so in some sense, it's actually less potent now that I've been around it a lot, and that I sing in choir, and that I have a knowledge of the technique and the language a lot more than I did, say, a year and a half ago. The contrast was so intense that it was oh, this is things being ordered towards the highest. I can see it, and I can hear it. I know it, and I can feel it, and I can feel it in my body, all of them. It's going on every level all at once. So that's with zero experience of Gregorian chant. And what's funny is it's years ago, before even before we're on this process to becoming before we became Catholic, I had wanted to like Gregorian chant, and I tried to like Gregorian chant, and I didn't like Gregorian chant. I listened to some Gregorian chant, I was oh man, it'd be really cool to like this, and I just I didn't. And so it's weird. It's not an appetitive thing, and there's music that on those levels I engage with more readily than Gregorian chant, but well, exactly what Father said, that it gets to you through a different series. It gets to you through a different process, and it works on you in a different way. And what it does when it's in you is also something different. So, yeah, does that answer your question at all?
So yeah, that's kind of getting at what I'm asking, and maybe Father Eric can clarify for me. Is that still in the Apollonian mode, or is that more approaching? Assume that Latin, what's being said, and you have that experience, which that there is a certain kind of experience when you're experiencing something beautiful with novelty that you've never experienced before. And there's a certain kind of overwhelming, a sense of awe that comes with that. But once you get into it, and you experience this when you encounter a truly beautiful piece of music and then study it and spend time with it. It's the same with the scriptures, right? You can come back to a scripture hundreds and hundreds of times, but once it gets into you, then it resonates with you on a different level, and suddenly you're weeping on the 101th time that you read it. Not necessarily because it's not just your, and I don't want to.
Sure.
The words intellect and rational, I don't know exactly the way that you all would use that. Obviously, that's included, but it also includes the embodiment, and it includes the Dionysian sense as well, it seems to me. Right. So ideally, would it not be an equivalent mix of all three oriented towards the highest?
So you are not hermetically sealed off from yourself, right? You're an integrated whole. You have these distinct faculties. It is useful to talk about these distinct faculties, but they all come together. And so that's why I was kind of focusing on where it enters, and Ted brought in the insight of, and it's also where it lives, but that's not the only thing that happens. And so, this was something I maybe emphasized a little better in my talk, but, the truths expressed by the Gregorian chant, which are not merely propositional, and that was a good reminder for me. Because the truths can just be embodied in music in a non-propositional way. It's sort of, and this is something they talk about grace too in the soul. It kind of overflows from the intellect into the passions, right? And then begin, or it flows down, or it orders them, places them in the right spot. And so, and I think there is some worthy church music that hits both at the same time, because, like I said, these different modes of music are not hermetically sealed. So the Miserere Mei by Allegri, with the you can look at the words and see, have mercy on me, O Lord. You could look at that and you could have an understanding of that's what that's about. And then you can just listen to it, and it also moves the passion together with a higher truth, right? So it's not just, saccharine and playing around with the passions. It can move them all together. The Gregorian chant, being a little more purely Apollonian, still has its effect on the passions, but now it's flowing down, right? It's emanation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Rather than just like moving with something, and that's kind of emergence, right? And who knows what's going to emerge from that? You might just hit somebody. I'm sure it's happened in a mosh pit before. That guy did nothing to you, but you're moshing it out at a Metallica conference. It's the Bay Area. It's 1984. People are crazy. You just hit somebody.
Yeah.
Do they call them conferences?
And it's interesting. I mean,
did I call it a conference? I meant a concert.
Even in like the high masses that we do, you actually do see like an arc to that, right? Because the entrance and recessional, like those tend to be, unless it's like a very penitential mass, they tend to be like very like, there's some like raw to it. Like we sang Christus Vincit on the way out today, and it's like, you get that bass line going. It's just like, it's awesome.
Christus Vincit, Christus Regnat.
Yeah, that, yes. Oh, it just like, and so that gets you in a way where it's like, it is like, there's something about, that like deep, I mean, even just like in the analysis of like, as a man singing, there's like deep bass lines, and there's that particular like rhythm to it that grips you, sort of like a marching, it's got that. I mean, it's interesting, right? Because Corey and I have talked about this quite a bit, like how moving the bagpipes are, right? It's like, there's something about that just like stirs you in a way. What's weird about the bagpipes though is something like that, or like the drums, is that they could like, man, like you could be going off to fight for, for God and country and defending the helpless, or you could be going off to like go take over someone and burn their village down. And like the drums kind of work the same way either way, right? And so that's that ambiguity when you're at that mode where it's like you want to make sure that you were ordered properly. It's not then bad, right? This is the thing that this is probably one of the fundamental misunderstandings that the whole West had moving into the Romantic era about what Christianity had to say about the passions, was that they're like, oh, the passions are evil. It's like, no. The passions are vital. Like you can't do anything without your emotions. You have to have emotions. It's just, can you get them headed in the right direction? And this is C.S. Lewis in The Abolition of Man. Is his point is like, when education ceases to be about directing people's emotional lives towards the good, then they will no longer like have any motivation to do what's good. And then you just see trash. Like there's no way around that. And so it's not so much that when we say there's a tendency to get higher and think that, oh, well, then you just have that thing and you don't need anything else, and anything less than the higher thing is just like you're wasting your time or something. And it's like, the fact that like my own life is ordered that way. I don't like stop eating because like the intellectual life is somehow higher than the bodily life, which it is. The intellectual life is higher than the bodily life, but that doesn't mean that the bodily life isn't good and necessary and to be cared for and to be appropriately ordered. It's an argument about the hierarchy, not about the value or the goodness.
And what I really, that was all brilliant. I really noticed that the appropriate time for the Christus Vincit is the recessional, when you're marching back into the world, right? It'd be really weird to do that one at the offertory, right? Be like, all right, we're all pumped up now. And the priest is going to whisper in Latin for 7 minutes,
Yeah, there's a pattern. There's a pattern to how and when you engage in it. What's a pattern?
Yes.
A pattern is an expression of a hierarchy, right? There's
Yes.
better and worse. But Corey, I want to see if I want to play with an idea, because I don't. You think people have this worked out, and I don't think they do, right? If rationality is the ordering, then intellect is your ability to see, eyes to see, that ordering.
Exactly right. And Mark did it again. Hasn't read a single book from the medieval era, and he understands intellectus and ratio. Ugh!
There you go. Not a single one either. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. Like, and then we want to push that down in the age of gnosis here. We want to know it, and it's like what that means is that, we were talking about this earlier. You can know a song without understanding the lyrics, and then learn the lyrics later, and then you know the song better, right? And then you can know something about them. Like, I got educated on early Yes, which I had familiarity with and enjoyed, but then I got educated by Father Eric here on early Yes, and he revivified some knowledge for me, which is that the lead singer used the voice as an instrument and didn't, like, lyrics aren't propositionally meaningful in Yes songs. And I was like, oh yeah, I had heard that before, but I totally forgot, right? And yeah, I was actually a big Yes fan when I was younger, because man, they got some good albums.
They got some real bangers, yeah.
Right. And a lot of that was prompted by the art that I have, because I have some Roger Dean original art signed by him, in fact, and he was the artist for a lot of their albums.
Yes.
So, and that was a nice art connection that we could make around our highly intellectual discussions. And fortunately, we had many non-intellectual discussions too, and
we had some pretty banal ones too. We had the whole happily.
Yeah, we had the whole darkness falling on us in the middle of the woods and not knowing if we were going to survive. That was great too.
I don't think we would have frozen to death, but it would have been really unpleasant.
It would have been a nasty night, dude.
It would
have been a really nasty night. Yeah.
We would have been trying to figure out how to get a fire going without matches.
Corey, do you remember that book we were talking about on the pilgrimage, Deep Survival?
Yep.
Do you remember this? Yes. There's numerous stories about people like Father Eric and Mark going off when it's only like 50 out and getting lost in some state park that they've been in 15 times and then dying. There it is. Yes. So I'm glad you guys made it out.
St. Joseph kept my battery alive.
Dude,
man.
Yeah. You want miracles? I was like, no way. This is great.
I highly recommend petitioning St. Joseph. He is quite the help. That's amazing. Yeah, by the way, that is a fascinating book. Deep Survival is just, in terms of kind of all of this discussion that's been going on. I read that one probably 15 years ago, and like this stuff in terms of, yeah, I'm glad to hear that, Corey. It is absolutely remarkable. Basically, his thesis can be summed up as, in survival situations, the number one most important quality is your capacity to see the situation as it actually is and not as you want it to be.
Yes.
That's 100% what Mark and I did. We got to a certain point, like, yeah, we're not getting out of here on our own. We're just going to call somebody.
No, there was all this pre-discussion, right? There was this, because Father Eric's like, there's going to come a time and it's going to be too dark. We need to know what that time is before it arrives. And I was like, that's a good point. We're going to keep track of that. and then it was, we're going to stop when that happens. Doesn't matter where we are. We're just going to stop when we can't see the trail. And that's exactly what we did. We stopped. We didn't move again. And we waited until they came with ATVs and saved us.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's like, I'm impressed. Like, that's pretty dead on. Like well, one of the things that's interesting, that another point he makes that stuck with me until now, is that he said that there's actually a certain age of children younger than which they tend to survive very well, because they don't like rationalize the situation. They don't think, I'm bigger than this, I can just make it. So they're like, I'm cold, I'm going to go find somewhere warm and dry, I'm lost, I'm going to sit here until someone finds me. And like, oftentimes the biggest problem for children in that situation is that they're so good at hiding, the rescuers can't find them.
Right.
But it's the grown-ups who are like, oh, no, I totally know what's going on. And he's got this, my favorite part is that he calls it bending the map, where you start rationalizing the discrepancy between the map either in your head or on the pages on you that you have, whatever, and what you're actually seeing. And you're like, I know that mountain should be like,
can you mute this guy, Father Eric? I don't like this talk. Can you mute him? I don't. This is too close to home.
All three of us are admins, Mark. It won't do anything.
That's true. I could have. I was thinking about it. I'm like, I don't want to hear this right now. This sounds hauntingly familiar. I don't like any of this.
Yeah, it's really. I mean, there's so many things in there that correspond as well. Like, so I have this notion that I've been playing around with some that is probably not a popular one, but my notion is that life is a lot more simple and a lot more difficult than most people think that it is. And so
Yes.
most of the complexity in the world comes not out of actual complexity, but out of people's attempts to work their way out of real difficulties. And you can go into that in the moral sense, but like in the actual sense, you know, one of the weird things about getting lost is if you just walk downhill, you will eventually find civilization. You'll find people. If you walk downhill, you will always end up where people are because water goes down.
I'm so tempted to mute you. Yeah. No, there were three points where I was like, looking back, I'm like, you complete retard. Like, and I was a Boy Scout. Like, I know better, and the over rationalization. Well, then that's why we're in trouble. A lot of the problems we have, to your point, like life is very, very simple. And what we do is we rationalize it incorrectly, right? We find the wrong ordering. And then, you know, we're worried about what's going on halfway around the world to people we physically cannot help. Right. Yeah. And then our attention is there instead of on the fact that we're lost in the woods. And then we're like, well, you know, and you know, I mean, that's only a slight exaggeration. I mean, really, a lot of people just get wrapped up. And so my friend was driving up to Massachusetts and her car started to do something funny, and it only does it at idle for whatever reason. So it drives fine. And she was absolutely panicking. And I was like, all right, look, you just need to get to a hotel and go to sleep. And literally all you need to do. You don't need to worry about the car or figure out how you broke it. I told her at one point, I said, you're not smart enough to break a car. Okay, so that didn't happen. So put that out of your mind. And it worked. In this case, I know this person very well, right? And it's like, put that out of your mind. You need to go 3.6 miles to this hotel and get a good night's sleep. And then I was like, and call me in the morning. And then somehow I forgot to put my phone back on. But when she got up in the morning, she just drove to where she was going and everything was fine. But in the moment, she was so panicked. She was rationalizing how the car broke as if knowing how the car broke would help you fix it, which, by the way, it won't. Just a hint, when a car breaks like that, knowing how it happened is not going to fix the car. You don't reverse the operation and then the car fixes it. So it doesn't actually matter how it happened in that case. So what we do, we create these problems. And then it turned out the simple fix was drive 3.6 miles to the hotel and go to sleep and wake up and in the morning continue your journey. That was the whole solution to the whole problem.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting. So I do a little bit of
I'm going to very quickly just say the words informational diabetes.
Yes. Yep. The flood of information causes information.
I was just going to say, Sally Jones said it really well. But I was just going to say, existing in the modern world, in our modern culture, is the same as being lost in the woods. There is no difference. Like, the only way to learn how to see properly is to break a whole bunch of stuff in an organized, you know, way.
Or
so that you break the things that are fake, I guess, to learn how to see the things that are real. But we like the fake things.
Or you could or you could be lost in the dark woods halfway through your life and be met by the ghost of Virgil and led through hell up to the top of Mount Purgatory.
That's an option.
I was just happy to see those nice park rangers and their ATVs.
That would make a good story, Ted. You should write like not a story, like maybe a poem about that.
Maybe a poem, maybe someone should do that. No, it is interesting because I do probably like one or two like arborist jobs a month. I've got a friend of mine. He's a climber, and so we like get jobs and help each other out with it. It's like a fun variation for what I do, but it's not infrequent where if we have a multi-day job where we're doing some high-risk tree removal, where at the end of the day we'll be like totally exhausted and like we've got this crazy plan for how we're going to like rig this stuff up and get all this stuff down, and we're like, we go home and we show up the next day and all right, I'm going to try to just ignore that. We've go home and go to sleep, and we'll wake up the next day and we'll look at the tree and realize we could cut one branch off and then fell the whole thing and be done. And it's like just the fact that we have like worked ourselves into the state of exhaustion and inability to see what's going on, because we're on this granular level of, we have to get like all the branches off the tree so that we can take it down in pieces. And then there's something sometimes about just, acknowledging that limitation, showing up the next day and being like, oh, we were completely overthinking this. And now sometimes that simplicity is just like, you just have to suffer. Like that's the reason that the whole notion of like life is not simple, but it's hard is, I think I see this a lot with parenting too, right? We have these crazy like systems of doing things with children, when like the answer for most people is just that like you kind of have to learn how to deal with being around your kids.
Yeah. Well, and the individualism kind of causes that. This idea that we're individuals means we have to know more about the world than we actually do. Like I don't have to know about C.S. Lewis's space trilogy because I can just ask Ted. Like, why do I don't need to do that?
Story two. Yeah.
Right.
Well, and my friend Brandon, who's a father of many children, his oldest is like 16. He jokes about how he's like, how his brain's going. And I was like, yeah, but have you noticed what you do? You're just like, you call one of your kids over and you ask them the question and they give you the answer. I was like, you may not know as much as you did when you were, in some of these areas when you were like 25 years old, because you haven't like worked really hard and done this stuff. Like you now have access to knowledge and skills that are way beyond you because you're willing to trust your family to know how to do this stuff.
Exactly.
And that's, that's a cool thing. I mean, it's just really interesting the way that can happen. And I've been blessed with siblings too, where I can do that, where I can, like, I have siblings where I can call them up and be like, I don't know how to do this or how to think about this. And they're like, oh yeah, the answer is just whatever. That was easy.
They already know. Well, and that's one of the good things about Vervaeke's work is that he stresses this distributed cognition. Now, of course, he doesn't take it far enough, right? But the idea that we can rely and should rely on distributed cognition is anti-individualistic fundamentally. It's like, there's a cognition out there that's greater than you. It's called everybody else, right? Or any group of people that isn't you is greater than you cognitively. Just has to be, right? Whether you're materialistic or not, you're done in at that point. And then once you understand that, if you can find the humility in yourself to trust that, even though it's going to betray you once in a while, right? But you betray yourself once in a while too. So really, is it that big a deal, right? That's better for you because it takes all that cognitive load off of you. And now you can focus on the things you're really good at and let other people focus on the things that they're really good at. And if you can trade that back and forth, it's better for everybody. Like that's generative because now you're not just parasitic on that stuff, right? You're not just using AI to try and program when you can't, right? Like it's way better.
Yeah. Guys, I'm going to call it a night. I got an early morning.
I was just going to say,
great talking with you all.
Get going too. Good to see all
you
guys.
It's going to be me and Mark. Here we go. Leaving me alone in the arena with this lion.
Dragon,
can't wait to hear how it goes.
Wait,
I'll listen to
the left-handed monster of the Peterson sphere or something like
the
that.
Left-handed monster of the Peterson sphere. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Who is this?
That's Mark.
I'm still waiting on a cool nickname like that. So
I don't know if I want a cool nickname like that.
I will get you one.
It'll come. You can't force a nickname.
Yeah,
I know.
Happen.
I shouldn't even voice my desire. It's against the code. All right, now y'all.
Guys.
Night, Ted.
Oh goodness. Yeah, man. The my little opening monologues proved quite fruitful so far.
Yeah, I like that. I like that outline. I thought it was very useful. I
have almost no idea where that tripartite structure came from. It just came up in the art of liturgical music I took when I was in seminary with Dr. Prouse. And my classmates are such Philistines. They were like, oh, that class is so boring. And I'm like, this is the best freaking class I've ever taken in my life.
I knew it.
We're just going through all the history of church music and talking about it. Like, what more do you want? It's amazing.
Right. No, I like that you brought it up, and I was just, of course, I already knew. Well, this is near and dear to his heart, so he'll be all kind of happy talking about this. And then I like how it kind of branched out into this larger discussion about rationality and intellect. It's actually like, poor Corey's like, I've often wondered about these things. I'm like, yeah, that's because absolutely no one's talking about it. And in fact, I think there's a ton of stuff that nobody actually knows. Like one of the things, like if you haven't heard Jonathan Pageau's ARC talk, I mean, and I'm actually not being hyperbolic. That's the best talk ever on anything. Like that is just the best talk. Like, first of all,
we learned that stuff in seminary.
Well, see but that's the thing. The number of times he said basically Plato had this all worked out, guys. Like I was like, yes. And you people just aren't paying attention to the fact that this stuff is already known. And apparently there's a medieval model of intellect versus rationality that most people don't know. And I
honestly, it might just be right versus left brain. Our McGilchrist model.
It can be thought about that way. Yeah. Well, look, I mean, we flat out stole a bunch of stuff from that, and none of us read the silly book. It's like 50 billion pages, but dense pages of research. But yeah, we flat out stole that. We're like, well, and I already knew a bunch of right left brain stuff because it's actually well published. Most of that work was done in the 80s and 90s. But yeah, we flat out were like, yeah, absolutely. We'll just divide it in the left and right because that's not wrong and it's close enough and it's not 100%, but like nothing
even
is.
If in a left-handed person, their right brain is actually on the left.
Right. It doesn't make any difference, right? The accuracy of the mapping at the material level is irrelevant. Materialists don't like that. So if you don't like that, you're a materialist, by the way. It's a good tell, right? And then that whole idea of accuracy is also wraps you up in the materialism. But really that subtle difference, and it's not so subtle, between rationality and intellect, right? The ability to understand like the rationality is this ordering. That's really important because placing the constraints, and I know we had a lot of talk about this. I know I've got this little painting here, which is available on my shop, by the way, shop.markofwisdom.org. You can buy one. Where there's two different.
Let's get a good look at that. Let's get a good look at that.
There's two different types of pointing, right? You can point in one way. You can point in one way with the woman pointing at the star, right? And then you can point in the other way. The man points down at the thing he built, and the thing he built is the thing the woman's standing on to be the same height. And there are different types of constraint, right? So men often constrain by building structures and keeping things inside like a cage. Women constrain by pointing, and that keeps your attention closer to that direction than any other. Those are two different types of constraint. I don't think people understand that. And then there's the third condition, which is unconstrained, which is chaos. And also this idea of three things. People have a really hard time with that. I have a video on that too, just put out recently. Right? You have a really hard time with that we're not stuck in this binary where it's like religious or secular, right? That's a ridiculous frame, right? We're not stuck in this atheist or believer. We're not stuck in this left or right, right? Everything's got three aspects to it. And when you don't have that appreciation, it's really hard to understand things like intellect and rationality. And what does it mean to be logical, right? And what does it mean to be emotional? Why is nihilism present? Like you can't balance nihilism, right? If you do like religion and nothingness, it doesn't. You can't think about the world that way. It doesn't work. It's too flat. It's too reduced. That's why I like your three types of music. It's like, no, there's three types of music, three aspects that music is appealing to. And yeah, you can tie that in. One's more emanation, right? And the emanation moves the other two. right? But it's more emanations. It's not that the others are bad, right? But and they all have their place. That's the other thing. We want one answer. So that I like it when you re-enchant like that. So that was a good enchantment from my perspective.
Well, we just got to thank Dr. Prouse and wherever he got that from. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, that yeah, it's you know, I don't know. I don't know what I'm trying to say. I just feel like it's my show and I should talk more. Yeah, yeah. No, church isn't supposed to be like the rest of the world.
That's really important. I mean, I think with the identity crisis, right? This identity politics is like everybody wants a single identity, and it's like,
And I think that's why Orthodox and on various levels, rather more traditional Catholics are the ones that are kind of they're holding on to people right now, right? And I don't even necessarily mean traditional Latin Mass, but like young people my age, it's like they want to have a liturgy with gravity.
right.
And if they can go to a Novus Ordo with some gravity to it, that's plenty for a lot of people, you know,
Right.
because we don't like taking things in the world with that kind of gravity, you know, and you shouldn't. Baseball,
Right.
it's like when you see these kids at like a kids, no, the parents at like a 7-year-old soccer game, and they're like screaming at the refs because they blew a call. It's like, my friend, 7-year-olds playing soccer. This is just supposed to be fun. It's good for them. Glad you're doing it. Glad you brought your kids there. But like, what do you?
Right.
This guy's getting paid like $10 to run around after a bunch of 7-year-olds kicking a soccer ball. Like, be at peace, my friend.
And why should he be perfect when you're not? And that's one of
Right.
the things we miss, right? Because we just assume that things are perfect because they're rational.
Even psychology has figured that out. It's called the fundamental attribution error, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like when you're rude to somebody, it's because you were having a bad day. It's because your kid was up throwing up all night. It's because you ran late to work, right? It was a good reason. Okay, yeah. And then you were rude to somebody because you were low on energy and your body was full of cortisol and you were interpreting everything as a threat, you know?
Right.
But when the person, you know, who cut you off in traffic, well, they're just a bad person.
Well, clearly,
yeah. They're just.
I mean, what other reason do I have access to other than good and bad at that point?
Right, and it's like,
right.
You know, that's why there some guy said, "Judge not, lest you be judged yourself. For the measure with which you measure will be measured out to you." Mark, you remember who said that?
No idea.
Okay.
Not well enough read, I'm afraid.
Okay. Oh, Sally Joe coming in with a little more important stuff here. When nothing has gravity, then politics will, and that's been ugly.
Exactly. That's the political frame taking over. Yeah, being the primary frame or the economic frame, right? And that came out in Vanderklay's talk on ARC Day 3, right? But the interesting thing with the Pageau talk was he's basically coming to the conclusion that 80% of the people there are Christians. And it's like, what possible other way do you think that would go down? Like, do you think an atheist can care that much about culture and society? I mean, ultimately, they can't on average, right? Not all of them, but they can't. They don't have the mechanism because they don't have the religious framework that would enable them to even interact at that level. And then, so 80% of the people there in a very secular place, right? They're in England or in London, right? But it's not just that they were there, but the ones that were speaking were largely Christian or religious of some kind. Of course, they're the ones that are going to do the work. Atheists don't do that kind of work. You know what I mean? Like Sam Harris is not getting people together, right? Because he doesn't like church. Well, what's a gathering of people? Like, you know, like at some point.
That's why they all need to have an app.
Right.
They all need to have an app because that's for individuals.
An app that separates them. because the meditation is very much like you know, exploring yourself or something stupid. Like it's more Western Buddhist garbage. It's nothing to do with how Easterners do it. And yeah, it's very much individualistic, separating you from other people, right? So they don't really have the tools, even if they care, to do anything on the cultural level. And then when they try, it's either political or economic, or it's through rational persuasion, right? And that's very what I'm calling age of gnosis, right? It's, well, I have the knowledge and therefore, right? And that's how we got ourselves into trouble. People are listening to experts. Don't listen to experts. Listen to leaders. Leaders are the ones you should be listening to, not experts. Experts are almost never leaders, and leaders are almost never experts. But leaders are willing to take the hit. They're the ones that should listen to the experts and then decide whether or not the experts are a little nuts. Because often, and I would say always, any expertise you have, you go nuts. Like, you know, when I look at computer stuff, I'm always like, well, why are they doing this way? These people are incompetent, right? And that may technically be correct, but it's not useful, right? Because I'm not doing the work, right? And maybe I could go in and do that work, but then I got other things to do. You know what I mean? Like all the way down, right? So it's not helpful for to listen to the expert about it, because it's not necessarily going to resolve anything.
They need to cooperate well. We had a big flood here in 2009, and we had a good mayor in 2009. He was just real solid, salt of the earth, North Dakotan, and he gets a lot of the credit for navigating the flood. The Army Corps of Engineers sent in a bunch of experts, and they said, you need to evacuate the town. And he said, no, we're going to stay here and fight it. And he was 100% right about what Fargo's like, because when we grasped the severity of the situation, we had all of the volunteer help that you needed, that you could possibly want in order to throw sandbags. So we spent like 3 solid days throwing sandbags, you know, and the town didn't flood. Now, he had his own expert on staff, somebody who had been studying the Red River Valley watershed for like 35 years. And so I always thought that, like, Danny Wallaker knew the Red River watershed really well. No, he had a really good expert working with him, and he trusted this expert over the expertise of the Army Corps of Engineers, who just kind of flew in and like, hey, you know, well, you need to have some extra voices. But he was the one who's like, no, because the Army Corps of Engineers at one point said, yeah, this is going to peak at 44 feet. And this guy's like, there's not 44 feet of water there. We're going to get about 41 and a half, maybe 42. And it peaked right between 41 and a half and 42. That's where the crest of the river was.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. Like, the leader decides which experts to listen to, because expertise is not one thing. Right.
And if Fargo had flooded and caught on fire and people died, guess who was going to take the hit? Right. It was the mayor.
Right.
He had skin in the game.
Yeah. That's a good book by Taleb. Yeah, it's important. And that's the thing. Like, they think expertise is just going to converge. And that's where they're like, you know, the scientific consensus. And it's like, science is anti-consensus by design. Like, the science isn't supposed to have consensus. Science has consensus. It's not science, technically, right? And you're not supposed to do that, which means that different experts are going to come up with different answers, which is why you don't listen to experts, because how do you know which one to listen to? Right? There's no way to know. You listen to leaders with skin in the game, because they're the ones that are going to ultimately be sacrificed on the altar. The experts are going to walk away free, no matter what happens, whether they're right or wrong. Right. And that's why you don't listen to experts. And then we have our time with this, because as individuals, we need to listen to somebody. And then we're just using expertise and pretending we're not owned by the experts at that point. But in fact, we are. I think that to me is one of the problems with art. But that's also what made Jonathan Pageau's art talk so good. I mean,
the contrast.
So good. Well, it sounded, the other thing too is, it sounded a lot like he was using words I would have used if I were making that speech, man. And the fact that he went after their primary goal of human flourishing, I'm like, yes, I'm glad he did. That had to take a lot of guts. There's his buddy Jordan Peterson, who's told by other experts, the right goal is human flourishing. And like when I found that out, I'm like, that project's doomed. Absolutely.
Well, you could, I mean, I don't know. I listened to the talk, and you could just feel like, even over stinking YouTube, not being in the room, you could feel like how much everybody in that room loved what he was saying. And the way you could tell wasn't just by all the applause, although there was frequent applause that came at relevant points. So it's not like, Communist Party, clap or die business. But it was also like how excited he got when he got that nonverbal feedback from people. Right?
Right.
You could just see him getting charged up once he realized, oh, this is landing.
It's landing.
I get like that when I'm preaching sometimes. It's harder over the internet, but it does happen.
Yeah.
And yeah. Ooh, millionaire Gnosticism.
Interesting.
Oh,
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because it was a pretty upper crust kind of event there. So, and millionaires need Gnosticism too. It's not just for the poor people.
We're in the
have
age
to have
of
their
gnosis.
own. Yeah, they have to have their own special, boutique Gnosticism.
Well,
it
and
can't
that's
just be
and
your
that's what it
everyday
is.
Gnosticism.
Yeah. That's really what it is. It was all it really is the fight of the 1% versus the fight of 1%, just different 1% in different categories. And people don't realize that. And somebody was making I think it was Vanderklay actually, but somebody's making the comment that a lot of the people that were there were from aristocratic families. It's like, oh, that's so interesting. And
that's right. They have an explicit aristocracy in England still.
Right. Well, and like, like, who should be King of Scotland is known to the Scots. And who should be in charge of Ireland is known to the Irish. And there are some arguments about which line to follow, because which rules you were following for succession, right? But like, they actually know that. Like, this is not something that is and it's not known to everybody, but it's known to a lot of people. And that's just like, we don't have that in the US. Like, we don't have anything like that, right? So it's like, oh, that's weird. So to us, it's weird, but to them, it's like, no, we know who the aristocracy is still, or should be, right? And they still have sway over there in a way that, like, we can't understand that in this country at all. And that was interesting to me.
I mean, that was, during the whole coronation thing of King Charles, I was like, not my monarch. Wish him best of luck. I think the monarchy of England has some certain benefits that the English people are certainly, I hope they enjoy, but it's just not going to happen in the United States.
Probably not. I mean, we do have our own mini aristocracy around.
Right, but it has to, like, you can't say it. You can't say it.
Right.
The second somebody said it, like, oh yeah, I'm actually the lord of Apple Computer Company.
Right.
It would just be like, no, you're not.
Stockholders. Right. But we treat people that way. That's part of the issue. We do treat people that way. And it's a problem, because it's not explicit enough, right? And the missing stuff in that was, Vanderklay is bringing out the, invoking the feminine nature of it, and I'm just like, it's all guys. Like, what are you talking about? At some point, it's like, I don't think you understand, right? And that's how we got here. It's combining the masculine and the feminine together. And I excoriated Protestantism, because I'm like, yeah, you guys have no feminine. That's like 99.9% of your main problem. Is you just don't have any way to engage.
It's amazing that they could have feminine female pastors, but not the feminine.
Well, because the feminine shouldn't be pastoring.
Yeah.
So it totally makes sense. It's like, yeah, I mean, there's a reason why. And I mean, I like my Jewish friend's explanation. Like, yeah, of course we separate men and women in the synagogue, because if women were visible by the men, they wouldn't listen
to the rabbi.
Right? They would pay attention to the right thing. Fair enough. Yeah, that is correct. Absolutely true. And
we
you
had
could argue it's a small effect, but actually it's probably not, and it's not a small effect aggregated over time with lots of people. That's for sure.
And okay, maybe if you've got a very mature congregation with a bunch of disciplined men in there, okay, but I think in high school they really should be, because I remember me in high school.
Well, and how do you get disciplined? You don't get disciplined by being exposed to everything all the time, and this is the problem we're running into. Like, when do you teach children, and what do you teach them about certain things? Like, these are not easy. This is one of the driving forces in the Republic by Plato. Nobody tells you that. No one mentioned that to me. I'm like, wait a minute. So you're saying Plato already dealt with the problem of children, and it's not like he goes in depth with it, right? It's like, well, of course there are children, and you have to be careful about these things. Duh, and therefore, but that's one of the driving motivations behind the Republic. Like, that's actually core to the text. You can't take that out, because if you did, the rest of the text doesn't make any sense. But the fact that it's in there and nobody bothers to mention that is a little weird to me, because it's one of the driving. And there's other absurdities, like one of the other absurdities in the text is, and they mention this like many, many times, and I'm not even done yet, so who knows if they mention it again. Men and women are supposed to be practicing naked together. And it's obviously absurd. Like, there's a lot of stuff in the Republic that's designed to be obviously absurd as a measure, as a way of contrast. But I think we're not accounting for that. Like, we're not, like Plato knew about
now when it's been a while since I've read the Republic, and maybe that's on me. Are they putting this into the mouth of Socrates though, or one of his wacky friends?
No, Socrates says this. So, but you gotta remember, Socrates is deliberately the character of Socrates in the Republic.
Sure. He's the gadfly. Yeah.
But the whole book is set up like Socrates. They say it explicitly, like, we don't want to have an argument with Socrates because he'll always end up being right. They don't say that, but that's what they say. That, like, they definitely say that, and so they don't even want to start the argument with him because they know they're not going to win. But then all of the arguments are binary, every single one of them, on purpose, like deliberately, right? So he'll say something like, well, you have to agree that a man, blah, 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 blah. And then, yes, I agree with, and it's, the whole thing's absurd. It's just silly. It's silly on purpose. And that's by way of this super contrast. So, and like, they go back to this thing about men and women practicing together naked, like 3 or 4 times at least in different sections. They just keep bringing it up, right? Because again, they're trying to be absurd. They're trying to show you that equality doesn't work, that you couldn't, this is dumb, right? But they're saying, because the ultimate surprise of the book is, if you had a perfectly logical, rational, reasonable world, like you just did away with all the things that don't allow for that, it still doesn't work. That's the point. That the point is, logic, reason, and rationality fail even if you give them every single thing they need to survive. They don't survive. That's actually the point of the book. It doesn't have another point at some point. It's just, the point is, you can give logic, reason, and rationality all the things it needs, even though they're silly, and it often appeals to the gods all over the book. No one mentions that all over the book, right? When logic fails, this is, well, hopefully Zeus will make this okay, or whatever goddess or god, right? Hopefully they'll make it okay. It's meant to be silly, and then it still doesn't work because the philosopher king solution ultimately fails. And so even logic and reason and rationality, in a world with all the affordances you can give them, can't solve the problem of justice. You can't solve justice with logic, reason, and rationality, no matter what you do. No one wants to hear that.
I mean, it looks like we're barreling towards a world of AI judges. Like in a court, it'd be like, hey guys, listen, like those real human beings that you've had as justices, they have
Right.
biases, right? They might even
Right.
be participating in systemic prejudices,
Right. Right.
so we can't trust them anymore. What you
Exactly.
can trust is the machine. The machine doesn't have any of that biases. So what we need to
Right.
do is we just need to have all of our, and that's why every like, okay, not every dystopian novel, but like the second that you have a robot cop, it's like
Right.
that's a sign that things are bad. RoboCop is not a sign of things going well. I remember
Right.
the
Right.
rather silly movie Elysium still managed to get that one right when Matt Damon's arm got broken by a RoboCop, right?
Yeah.
It's like they got that bit right. I'll hold that up as they got that bit right. Judge Dredd, he's more of a robot than he is a human being. He's just like,
Yeah.
you're going to do justice that quickly,
And that completely, and that like it's that final.
Yeah. And then Isaac Asimov, his robots were actually human. So there.
Yeah.
Just rather
Well,
autistic.
yeah. Well, he really was. Yeah, the father of autism. Yeah. And it's weird that people don't see that. And of course, where is the bias in AI? It's in the people training it. Who are the people training it? There's the aristocracy. There's
Mhm.
the American aristocracy right there. It's the it's Elon Musk versus what is it? Satya Nadella versus Sam Altman, right now. I mean, who knows who else? Um, and that's what it is. Like, oh no, we trust these guys. And yeah, well said, William. AI means automated non-accountability, right? Because it's not bias, so we're good.
That's
Super
why I was
murdery.
so interested in the. I sent you the link a couple of weeks ago about the the artistic nightshade. Like you run your piece of digital art through some kind of process that just makes
Yeah.
minor little alterations to the pixels
Yes.
invisible to the human eye because hey, we've got Intellectus up here. We could just put the whole together. But it would really, I just
Well, we've
break
got
the
a filter.
machines, man.
Yeah, we've got a filter for order. Yes, somebody asked me about that, so it was useful that you sent me that link because I already knew what they were talking about. So that was helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's like, yeah, and the thing was they didn't quite understand. So you change something like 2 pixels, we would filter that out because we're looking for order.
I mean,
Right?
that's
We
that's
already
just
have a
like a little
payload.
bit of dust on the screen to us.
Right, but what that does is it corrupts every other picture somehow. And like I've been doing AI for a long time, so I understand exactly how this works. I can describe it in great detail. But, and one won't do it, right? But I mean, one will have an impact. But like if you feed it enough of those things, it actually corrupts the entire data set. And it only takes a tiny number of those to corrupt a very large data set. And once the data set's corrupted, you're all done. Like you're finished. Your AI doesn't work anymore. And we don't suffer from that problem because we look for order first because it's emanation based, whereas AI is emergence based. Oddly enough,
That was the way the medievals talked about the word is intellectus, right? The intuitive grasp of an object, a form, and they called it an angelic mode of knowledge.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, because it all I say that angels don't have to do discursive reasoning to get somewhere, right?
Yep, that totally makes sense.
They
That is
just
correct.
they go straight there. They have this
They're already
intuitive
there.
knowledge there. And when you have an insight into something, it all happens at once.
Yes.
That's
Right.
why we're the middle point between material reality and heavenly reality is we could do that, but we're still materially embodied. We're not just floating off in heaven, whatever heaven is. I started ranting about heaven a little bit during my breakout. No. During the RCIA class I taught on Thursday night, and that got a little far for people coming into that. But it was only about 30 seconds of ranting, so I didn't stay gone too long. We brought the Starship Aquinas back down to Earth.
Starship Aquinas, I love it. We need one of those now. We need a Starship Aquinas graphic. That's great. Yeah, it's I don't know about heavenly versus material reality. I might go with heavenly existence versus material existence. That sounds good.
Sure,
Um,
because the reality actually happens in between the two.
there you go.
Yeah.
Right, and it's fungible, which nobody likes. Nobody likes, and this is all in contrast to how we think of intellect today. Because in the age of individualism, intellect is something you build up for yourself using whatever, right? Education, whatever it is you're using, and sort of the theme that I've been noticing because I went to a conference on Thursday that was local around entrepreneurship, and their big theme was the why. It's just like, this is fascinating.
Here
And then I
comes final causality.
make final cause great again. Yeah. And then the interesting part to me was I realized at some point that the pattern they're following with entrepreneurship, even at the federal level, is they're using that instead of education. So the key to getting everybody out of where they're at and making them flourish, the key to human flourishing, because it's very much
Is
what they're
final
about,
causality.
is entrepreneurship instead of college. And I was just like, oh, that's exactly what they're
They're
doing.
reinventing distributism.
Well, they're
Or there's
trying to,
the principle of distributism, which
but
is
it's
trying
not
to get
going
the
to work. But it's
yeah,
not
but
going to work. Like
getting the
most
means
people
of
can't do
production.
it.
Yeah. Well, most
Most
people
people
can
can't
do.
be entrepreneurs. Like, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Like, it's really hard. Like, it's really hard.
So the principle of distributism, which is different than the actual political program, which was a little heavy-handed. So I just want to get that out there right away. The principle of distributism was trying to get the means of production into as many hands as possible. Now, the way they
Right.
were going to go about that was like, we're going to give everybody an acre of land and a cow, and it's like, I don't know if that's going to work. And the British public voted that down. I think the British public was correct in their assessment of that particular plan. And I don't know how you do that nowadays.
Yeah.
Because like farming is one thing, it's very traditional, and you could just get like in an old agrarian society, it's like this was just a part of the way of life. It was sort of embedded in everything. So even though it's super complicated, if everybody around you is doing it, you'll be able to figure it out.
Well, or you'll have the problem is that knowledge can't be book learned. It can't be
Yeah.
educated into you, right? It
Right,
has
right.
to be exemplified for you. And when you have less and less exemplification, or you're further away from that exemplification, then it's a problem. And then that's the same argument I make for the recession of the church. When the church's exemplification is further away from you, you enacting the good becomes harder because you don't see it every day. You don't see it you don't see things pointed up. You don't hear Gregorian chant on the street, right? You hear Darude Sandstorm. It's absolutely one of my favorite pieces of music, by the way. It's absolutely. Yeah, when I was younger in particular, I was long before the meme. I didn't learn about the meme until like a few years back. In fact, it's like, really? People were just telling everybody who asked what song it was that it was Darude Sandstorm, regardless of what song it was. That's hysterical. Oh yeah, there was a whole movement on Reddit and stuff for years doing that, and I just had no idea because I wasn't in those spaces. But it was a good song for getting work done for me, man. I would just put that on and I'd put it on loop, and I would just bang out code and fix all kinds of computer problems, and I was a beast. I would just I'd listen to that for hours, no problem. And similar things like I listen to EDM occasionally still, right? But on Sunday,
when I'm working, I do prog rock songs.
Yep.
Remixed with the Final Fantasy VII sound font.
Nice.
It's amazing. Nice. I get so much work done. It's just unbelievable.
Dream Theater, what are you doing for prog rock?
So this guy, I follow a particular channel. He does a fair bit of Yes. He also does some Genesis. He's done some Emerson, Lake and Palmer, a lot of King Crimson. He's a big King Crimson fan. I think.
There you go. That's good stuff.
And I know some King Crimson. I'm not. There's whole albums I just don't know anything about. So yeah, but it's just like that video game, because like the video game music is designed to accompany something else. and kind
Yeah.
of set the mood, but it doesn't grab your attention. And so the sound fonts work well. And plus they're nostalgic, and then it's like music that I'm familiar with, but without the words to distract me.
Yeah.
Perfect.
That's interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that. That sounds fascinating. You'll have to share that with me.
It's
Well, I
actually
wanna-
in the description below. Seabass Fiction. That's the channel.
okay.
Give them a
I will
like and a
check that
sub.
out. I will definitely check that out.
And
Yeah,
then
but that's good for your theme, right? Because you need it's not optional, right? It's not like you only listen to Gregorian chant. Now you only do that if you're a crazy monk, which is fine if you want to be a crazy monk. But
the world needs the crazy monks, but that's going to be 1% of the population.
Right. And people get mixed up. Like we want everything to be so equal and flat. And
if something's true about 90% of people, that's really useful to know. And then when you encounter that other 10%, it's like, oh, okay, exception. Found an exception. Happens all the time.
Well, the exception that proves the rule was an important thing I grew up with that I don't think we have anymore, because people keep pointing at exceptions. And I'm like, I understand that there's an exception, you idiot. Like, I get exceptions exist. I realize the world isn't flat and perfect. I get that part. You're doing the opposite of what you think you're doing by calling out an exception.
I've never understood that phrase.
What?
Like the exception that proves the rule. I've never understood what anybody, but I never say that because I don't know what it means.
Well, if there wasn't an exception to it, it wouldn't be a rule. It would be a law, like an unbreakable law.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
A rule is something you follow.
So it's like when you see the exception, it's like, oh, that's why that rule exists.
Well, and rules aren't laws. They're not things that are every time. They're not every time. Like
laws aren't even laws in the Catholic Church. You get a dispensation.
Well, yeah, well, true. But I mean, the more classical version of law is the law is something that cannot be broken. It is the thing with no exception. But natural law is something that there's no exceptions to natural law. It's not like natural law gets suspended every once in a while, or you can get off the natural law path and pick a different one. That's not the original conception. Whereas rules, where somebody sets like a leader might set a rule, right? An authority might set up a rule, and then you're supposed to follow that, but maybe you can't even do it exactly, and that's okay, right? But it's the exception that gives you the contrast to see the rule, whereas you don't have contrast for a law. Like you don't see the exception to gravity.
Unless St. Joseph of Cupertino's around. He just started praying and would levitate, and then there would be a crowd and a spectacle at the monastery, and the abbot would have to come out and order him under holy obedience to come down, and then he would.
Well,
no, but dude, this is amazing because the church, like the phrase canon law doesn't really make much sense because the word canon comes from the word for a ruler.
Oh, I see.
Right, so it was a rule, right? And the church was like specific about it. It's like, well, we've got rules, but we don't, that's canon, but we don't have laws. That's nomos,
They got that backwards. That's unfortunate.
Well, no. Canons are only for ecclesial discipline, right? So it's like, what do we do in this situation? Well, 95% of the time, you should probably do this. But there might be that 5% of the time where, the local authority can give a dispensation from the canon.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
That's how most, and so
it's used in reverse.
It doesn't match the language, the vocabulary you're using, because we call them laws now and legislation.
Right.
But if it's merely ecclesial legislation, it always admits of dispensation. But divine law does not admit of dispensation, right? There's no flexibility, and so the language isn't quite as precise anymore.
Yeah,
and that's where all the problems come from.
It's all a language problem. Thanks, postmodern Father Eric. Yes, very good.
Postmodern Father Eric. Yes,
that's your new nickname. from now on. Yeah, and that is the issue. We fall into this blaming the language, blaming the culture, blaming this, blaming that, right? And we get into that rebellion mode where it's not me. I'm not my inability to conform is not the problem. The problem is the language. The problem is the culture. The problem is these religious people.
Preach it, Mike. Preach it. Preach it.
These are all the problems.
It's all everybody else's fault.
The politics. That's the. If it weren't for if it weren't for the economy, if it weren't for my neighbors, like,
if it weren't for the very idea of constraint itself,
yeah,
I would be God.
Pretty much. Well, and it is that different types of constraint that people don't appreciate. Constraint by walls and constraint by pointing, and it's just a huge issue. Like, people just don't, and then we've got people pointing all over the place at things and nobody understands, and it's weird. I actually had this incident where somebody was very concerned about slides. I was like, you know that he fell and now he's bleeding, and you're worried about slides. And it took her a while, but she's like, "You're bleeding." He was like, "No, it's fine." He was bleeding and did need to go and like clean up. But it was weird, right? It's like you're so focused on tomorrow.
Are we talking about like slides that you go down, or slides that you show on a
slides you show on a screen? Yeah, it's like, why are you worried about tomorrow's slide presentation? He's bleeding. Like, like, just pay a little bit of attention to the person in front of you instead of the event that's happening tomorrow. Like,
sometimes you need a little help. Like, I've missed things before.
Oh yeah, people miss things all the time. No, you always need a little. Well, that's the thing. Like, you gotta accept a little help, right? You gotta be able to accept the help. A lot of times the help is right there, and you're just not accepting it. And yeah, I mean, there's things you can do, right? Like, I'm very big on, I can beat this person at their game, right? And sometimes, even though I know better, right, I'm like, I don't play your game. I play my game. If you can lose at your game by playing your game well when I'm playing a different game. That's fine. But sometimes I get caught. I'm like, oh, I want to play this game and win at this game with these rules. It's totally unnecessary. It happened to me on Friday. Luckily, Friday didn't go down that way. I went down the right way, which is no. You play this game because they can't win this game at all ever. And I was like, oh yeah, you're right. Why am I trying to win this game where I don't have 100% chance when I could have 100% chance if I just switched my game? It's like, good idea, right? And I had some help on that. It went rather well. So that was lucky. It was lucky I was able to
that one.
To listen.
We had the parish musicians workshop all Friday night. It was productively engaging with my local community. 100% you would be on board with that. Yeah.
Oh, that was great. No, I had a legal deposition that took all freaking day. And
I hope your lawyer isn't a complete hoser.
No, he's the one that said, you're trying to do the wrong thing. Stop it. And yeah, and then I was like, you're right. I'm trying to do the wrong thing. And then he said, you need to do this. And I was like, yes, I need to do that. And I did. And he was like, that went great. And I was like, good. That was really important that go great.
This is like that distributed cognition thing, right?
Yeah.
You could be pretty smart, but like, if this guy's done this kind of legal case before and is a halfway decent lawyer, he's going to know something you don't.
Yeah, I mean, I would have won any. In fact, most of the shots I wanted to get in, I got in, but I didn't go in that way. Right, but that was really important, right? Because the way I went in is like unassailable, and the fact that I got my shots in is just a bonus. It's just like an extra thing. Like, here's your legal grounding gone for you, by the way. But that's not the game I'm playing. It just happened to work out that way, So, because it's all about painting a picture, and if you can't paint the right picture, right? Legal stuff is legal stuff, and that's great, and it's good to win on legal stuff if you can. But legal stuff doesn't win the day, right? What wins the day is painting the right picture so that people understand what they're seeing. Because if you don't see the painting of the house, you don't see the painting of the house. And then all the fact that the canvas is wrong is not going to convince people there's a house there.
Yeah, yeah, and you need to give, in a legal system, you need to give the why should we care to disrupt things, right?
Yeah.
Because let's say I remember hearing this case. It was a couple hunters who were out hunting, and the landowner had an unmarked boundary. So they were on legal land, and then there was just like a section that didn't have any fence or any marking whatsoever that they had gone, into this guy's property. And he finds them out there, something like 50 feet into his property, field dressing an antelope they shot, and said, "This is illegal. You can't be here." And it's just like, there wasn't even a fence, dude. Like, you're just being a jerk right now. And
Yeah.
if the judge has any sense, it's like, yeah, okay, technically, yeah, you were on this guy's land without permission, but buzz off, dude. Come on.
Right.
Like, why
right.
should I enforce this law when you can't even be bothered to put up $100 worth of fence or a post,
a sign or something?
a sign of some sort that says no trespassing, like one sign every quarter of a mile or something.
Right. You got to have something.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you got to look at the whole picture, right? It's a picture. It's not I won because you broke this rule, right? And no, it's sometimes that works. Like the New England Patriots were famous for this for years, right? They were just the team with the fewest errors. And man, did they win. There was one season where I think they won all but 2 of their games that way. And came right down to the end every game. And it always came down to, almost always at the end of the game, the other team made an error when they didn't. And just, if you counted the number of errors in the game, the number of actual penalties, they had one less. and that one was always critical to a score or a lack thereof, right? And so they just won that way. And so sometimes that happens, but it's super rare. Like, there's no other team in the NFL that's done that as many times as the Patriots have, for example, right? It's just a technique. You can win on technicals sometimes. It's super rare. And it's hard. It's really hard to win on technicals because being technically accurate is hard. And it's often unnecessary because what matters is the narrative, the whole story, right? It doesn't matter that there's 3 types of music and that one of them is really important in church. What matters is that there's 3 types of music and you need to engage with all of them to be a complete person, the proper relationships in the world, right? The proper rationality in the world, right? And you need to intelligize that. You need to be intelligent about it by understanding those 3 types of music, which is why I really appreciated the opening theme. I thought it was great.
I've been looking forward to doing that for a while, and I wanted to wait until after the parish musicians workshop, so that I don't know why that was important, but I did it anyway, and it didn't hurt anybody. So,
well, it might have been important. It might have been important for your expression of it, right? To have an
sure.
experience
After having
of it.
given the breakout twice yesterday, it's now ready for the real world, YouTube.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of people will express things without experiencing them. And like, I see that all the time. Like I listen to somebody talk about how to code something. And I'm like, you've never coded anything like that. I can tell by listening to you. You have 0 experience in a project like that. And it's weird that you can tell that. And not everybody can do that. I can. I happen to be an expert in the field too, right? But I also have other detail skills. Well, also missing another number of detail skills, but that one I have, so I can tell when someone's speaking purely propositionally. And so it was probably important for you to have that experience and then talk about it, especially so close together. That was probably really good.
Yeah. So since you're so perceptive, what can you tell about me right now? What sort of state am I in?
That you're tired and it's time to close it down.
My body thinks it's 10:30 right now, way past my bedtime. So
fair enough.
Delighted to have you on, Mark. Wish we could have kept Corey and Ted longer, but
Me
that's how
too.
life goes. They've got these little humans running around their houses. That requires extra attention. We're
It's
free
their
of
own
such
fault,
thing.
though. It's
It
their
is
own fault.
100%. They knew they were getting into.
They didn't think about us first. That's what I'm upset about.
Yes. I'm going to think about me first and shut this down. So good night, and God bless you all.